You're listening to Literacies, conversations about literacies that can change your life. In this 4-part series, we're talking to experts about why media literacy, data, information, and financial literacies are critical skill sets for modern life. We'll give you a quick dive into what it means, how it impacts you, and things you can do to skill up. This episode is all about financial literacy. To talk about financial literacy, I'm joined by two guests, Professor Toni Weiss and business librarian Tim Coady.
Hello. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for joining me. Toni, can you introduce our listeners just who you are, what you do here at Tulane? And Tim, I'm going to ask you to do the same thing after.
Thank you. So I'm Toni Weiss. I am a senior professor of practice in the economics department. I'm also the executive director of CELT, which is our Center for Engaged Learning and Teaching. And as my faculty role, I teach one class for the SLAM program, which is financial literacy. And I have nicknamed that How to Adult.
That is fantastic. As introduced, my name is Tim Coady, and I am the librarian for the Freeman School of Business. So in that role, I am in charge of the collections policy for our undergraduate and graduate student populations, and then for consultation and providing resources for the research needs of our faculty here at the Freeman School of Business. I also do a few different drop-in sessions on teaching some research skills and some other useful library abilities within the business education context. So I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah, and I've had an opportunity at random occasions to work with both of you, and both of you are just like fabulous to work with. So let's start our conversation with our very first question of what is financial literacy?
So I'll jump in. And I think that different people would take a different perspective. Since I am viewing this class as a life skills class for our students, I think of financial literacy as their own personal literacy, their own personal finances. So a financially literate person in their own life would be somebody who is competent making financial decisions, has made financial decisions in such a way that it's not it's not a burden for them, that they will be able to live their life within a lifestyle that that doesn't cause undue stress and burden from a financial perspective. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I love the way that you put that in such a personal context, because thinking about my own history with like the concept of financial literacy, I was just such not a math person in high school. And then when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I was very much about I'm not motivated by money, I don't need to be rich and all that. But what I didn't kind of really consider in all of that is maybe I don't need to be rich, but I do need to figure out how to, well, maybe if I'm taking a job that isn't paying as much as another one, how do I make that work for me? How do I figure out how to achieve these goals that I have without having finances be something that's dragging me down and preventing me from being able to do that? Empowered is one of those words that gets thrown around about everything, but it really is about this idea of like being able to create your own ability to achieve goals for yourself.
And we've created, I really like the way you said that as well, Tim, that we've created such pressure around money. Like we can't talk about money. Like it's this taboo topic. But then the more taboo it is, our students, I find in particular, are have no concept, right? And they kind of are being thrown out into the world without some of those basic skills, and it affects them in every aspect of their life. Like one of the major causes of divorce is issues over money. And so if we can teach our students that it's imperative to understand your finances and to be able to talk about them, then I think that we can help eliminate some of those really difficult life points.
100%. And I wonder how many of your other kind of interviews processes you've come up with this thing about the personal end is like greater than too. And I think when we're talking about financial literacy, I love that you talk about divorce. Like anyone who's even been in just like a short-term relationship knows that money stuff can create such big problems. And going back to that idea of being empowered, if you're in a relationship that isn't working out, being able to leave and having financial independence, that is a huge thing about financial literacy. And in talking about like the greater stuff, racial disparities and wealth, a lot of that is due to our not having a structure to teach financial literacy to people from poor backgrounds or people of color. Like that's a huge issue. And so when we are thinking about this, we have to remember that like it's not just this like, oh, money stuff. It's like this is stuff that makes a huge difference in people's lives.
Yeah, yeah. I'm definitely thinking that the financial planning that my parents did, like when they were my age, the way they planned does not work for my generation. I think maybe speaking to that a little bit in this way that it sort of financial literacy and financial planning might change over time. So we talked a lot about how it works for us, maybe at a slightly like where we are in our lives. We're already out of university. Can you help place it a little bit more presently? Like, what does financial literacy mean for today's students?
One of the very first assignments that I have my students do is estimate how much money they think they will spend over a 2-week period. And that's everything. And if I just want them to get a sense, everything that they're going to spend. And they write it on a 3x5 card. I fold it up, I staple it, and I write their name on it. And then they have 2 weeks to keep track. At the end of 2 weeks, I pass these cards back and they're stapled. It's a personal amount, and I certainly don't want any comparisons across students. But they have to figure out their percentage difference, right? So by doing a percentage, it evens the score. And the students are shocked by how much more they spend than they anticipated that they spent, almost always the number is 25 to 50%, sometimes more than they anticipated. And that's a great launching off spot for the semester because they begin to see, how much money they're spending on Ubers and coffee, or they didn't anticipate their car would break down or they would have a medical expense. And both of those are really important topics, the small things that add up and having enough money for those big emergencies.
Oh, yeah, that's such a great exercise. I love that idea. And something that I think about when you're talking about how our parents' generation isn't necessarily gonna have that same financial landscape ahead of them. As librarians, we think about currency of information a lot, which is, how recent is the information I'm looking at? Is this the most recent thing, or is there scholarship or knowledge that's a little bit more recent? Am I looking at something outdated? And so you have all of these rules. You shouldn't spend more than your 1/3 of your income on rent. But when you're looking at housing markets that are so different from your parents' generations and things like that, you need to be able to kind of like figure out what is the current situation. And so I think in terms of literacy, I think that's so important is that a lot of the financial literacy we're taught as children is kind of these tidbits that might not necessarily be as accurate as they were for a previous generation.
Yeah, that's so great.
Tim, I think that that's a great point, right? That financial landscape is different and that information is different. In one way, it's just made it so much more difficult because there's so much more out there. And I think it's almost information overload that our students don't even know where to begin. And so they don't start. Which is why I do try and boil it down to basic. Like you start a job, you have a 401k option. Just don't worry about it. Just check a box. Like you don't need to worry. Is it more equity? Is it more bonds? Is it more cash? Like just start saving. When you have time to dig into it, great. But don't prevent yourself from doing the work that you need to do because you don't understand the particulars of what's happening.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. So this idea of information overload made me sort of think about what we do in library land. So Tim, I'm actually wondering, do you in your like research consultations and your instruction sessions. Do you see that a lot when you're working with students, sort of information overload and trying to sort of take a deep breath and step back? What does that look like when you work with
Ab-
students?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you do just a Google search for any sort of topic that's related to a loan for an auto, if or a home loan, it's one of the very few fields, oddly like political science or like any sort of campaign work, where there are people who are incentivized to give you bad information or to not quite tell you all of the information that you might need to know. And so I think what Tony is striking on the head so importantly of focusing on the basics is such a good idea, which is that like, well, maybe I don't need to know all of the intricacies of how like all of these different work ideas work, but I do kind of have an idea of putting away money, having that safety net, being able to create like, and then figuring out the more granular details as you kind of work along. And so I think, yeah, when you're coming in for a research consultation, you're looking at this universe of data that is press releases from someone who has, this incentive to tell you certain things. You have all of these different experts who, what credentials exactly makes one an expert in this field, um, a huge like press out there of people who write about financial matters. And so being able to locate like one or two things so that you're not just drowning with all of these different opinions can be tough. And I think, yeah, as you mentioned, libraries are a pretty good place for that.
For sure.
I have another assignment that I give the students, and I call them expert phone calls, where they have to cold call people and get information. Now, for some people, that's super easy. But for a lot of other people, like myself, that is a stressful thing to do. Over the years, I've had to really narrow it because I would get people telling me they called their father's friend or, their uncle's barber, whatever. Like that doesn't work. It has to be somebody you do not know at all and have no connection with. And you have to have at least a 5-minute phone conversation with them in which you're gathering information on some topic.
Wow. Just yesterday, I was like, oh, I need to get a hold of Tim quickly so we can schedule this recording session. And I'm like, I could pick up the phone to try and call him because email will take too long. But instead of picking up the phone, I'm going to walk to the business library to try to meet him in person. It's this very strange thing. And so I'm just imagining our students today trying to navigate the same thing. That's difficult, but also like, yeah, that's really helpful. That's really helpful to do. It's a skill worth developing, just making a phone call for information. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we covered a lot of what financial literacy is, this ability to make solid decisions so that you can, live your life. Um, and the impacts of financial literacy seem very clear. And I think some of these things that people can do to skill up have already surfaced in this conversation. Um, but can you give a few more, like, what should students do to skill up? So, Tony, I know you've got your classes. Tim, you've got some great research consultations and like this. And we can sort of crosswalk financial literacy and then understanding the information available online with information literacy. So you can do work like that with students. But are there any other like workshops or classes or books or podcasts, documentaries? Like what would you recommend students do?
I mean, any and all. And there are a lot of apps that they can use, right? Again, when we're thinking about personal financial literacy, thinking about their own budgeting, there are a number of apps that will help them track their spending, that will help them create a budget and see whether or not they're going over or under. Um, I do tell my students that when they get out of school, they need to schedule one night a month and put it on their calendar and hold it to them. Obviously, if they have an opportunity to go to, some major event that is the only night,
Mhm.
don't forgo it, but that they should really try and stick to that one night a month to review their finances, to look at their balances in their accounts, to check their spending against their budget.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think we touched on this too, but getting into being able to feel comfortable talking about money with other people, like real, like being able to divorce it from this emotional, really charged context and talk about it as just another way of planning your month ahead, I think can be really important. And I would be a bad librarian if I didn't touch on, as Tulane affiliates and Tulane, students, you have access to the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Barron's, the Economist, you have uh, a a gigantic sea of vetted, curated, really well researched information. That you know, on the subject of finances, these would cost you a lot to be able to get all of this information at your
Mm.
fingertips. So getting used to just like taking a look at financial news that matters to you. Not everything is going to matter to everyone, but if homeownership is in your future, getting used to if that's something that matters to you, getting used to looking at interest rates or reading the news about the housing market. And so those I would really strongly, go to the Turchin webpage. There is 15 different really great media sources. Go make an account. You can create customized feeds, all that kind of stuff. So.
And with my econ hat on, I'm building an understanding of how those macroeconomic indicators how they change and how they impact your life, right? So it's one thing to understand the interest rate on a mortgage. You can take it one step further to understand what causes interest rates to change, so you can anticipate and try and plan your spending in line with the movement of the economy.
Mm, that makes a lot of sense. And even just again, so like mortgages are absolutely important, but I'm also thinking if I were an undergrad today, the idea of getting a house is far in my future. But in that sense, still understanding how things are moving is something as simple as booking a flight, right? And
For getting a car, right? Most people finance their car, and that's definitely the amount they'll pay is interest. Undergraduates who are graduating are thinking often about medical school, law school, graduate school, and thinking about the loans that they might need to take in order to finance that additional education.
Well, Toni and Tim, this has been an enlightening conversation for me. Realizing there's still a lot more learning and reaching out that I need to do. So I just want to thank you both again so much for your time and expertise. It's been a delightful conversation.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
It was great being here. Thank you.
All right, friends. You've been listening to Literacies, a 4-part audio series. What you just heard was a shorter excerpt from a much longer conversation. To listen to the whole conversation, read the transcript, learn more about today's guests, or check out any of the resources mentioned just now, visit our website, libguides.tulane.edu/literacies. This episode was recorded over Zoom. Now, normally I'd use this moment to say don't miss our next episode, but this was the last one. If you really loved these conversations and have a literacy you want to hear about or maybe want to talk about with us, send us a line to mediaservices@tulane.edu using the subject line Literacies Pitch. Our host for Literacies is Lisa Hooper. Our audio engineer and audio producer is Justin Green, and Alan Velasquez is our video producer. I can't sign off this last episode without acknowledging all the folks who supported this series, knowingly or not. Thanks to Sean Knowlton of Digital Initiatives and Scholarship at Tulane University Libraries, who helped me hone in on the best platform for our website. Anthony Del Rosario and Scholarly Engagement at Tulane University Libraries for his design work that you can see on our website. Alan Velasquez for letting me rope him into making the audio visualizer and assisting with captioning and transcripts for YouTube and our website. All of our guests, Catherine Hicks, Moira McCammon, Victoria Elmwood, David Rodriguez, KP May, Patrick Button, Aaron Kulota, Tim Coady, and Toni Weiss. To the entire Scholarly Engagement team and library leadership for humoring this somewhat wild idea of mine, and a special shout out of appreciation to our audio producer, Justin Green, who brought a steady ear and an enormous sum of patience and skill to his work. And finally, a super cheesy but still absolutely necessary thank you to everyone who listened.